Welcome to Payne on Politics, a podcast where host Dr. Gregory Payne of Emerson College sits down with fellow experts to discuss the current state of politics, public opinion, and global affairs. In a world growing increasingly complex, communication and critical thinking is key. This only makes the Emerson motto, expression necessary to evolution, more true.
Hello, this is Gregory Payne, Chair of Communication Studies at Emerson College, also co-director of the Emerson Blanquerna Global Center. I'm here today in my office with a colleague who actually has been in various seats at Emerson College. He used to be working with Diego Salazar. He was my assistant when we were over at the Legacy campus, which of course he remembers here. Matt Dorsey, thank you very much. Kevin Mercuri, you also were on that trip to Russia. So we've had a lot of experiences.
Absolutely.
And you're back teaching.
Again, absolutely. Great to be back.
First of all, I would say you're back teaching. You've got Profeta, which is a boutique firm down in New York. Mm-hmm. What is it like to go into the classroom and teach back at your alma mater?
It's fascinating because I took public relations classes at Emerson back in the 90s.
Was this with Ted?
Ted Hollingworth,
okay.
yes.
How about Dr. Brown?
No, just with Ted.
Just Ted, okay.
And so that was the basis of my public relations. But then, of course, you go out I went to Washington, D.C. after I received my master's degree and really got into the thick of it and was getting into the thick of it for the last 25, 30 years. So really, the challenge here of one thing I was thinking on the way in this afternoon was the fact that in business, you're always trying to compact everything, to distill everything down into like a 3-minute presentation or a 30-second soundbite. But when you're teaching, you really have to expand out again and go into detail. And that really, on the one hand, it's a challenge, but on the other hand, it's really enabled me to develop or redevelop or re-realize how much I love public relations.
You know, that reminds me, when we did the first SportsCom course, I coached out with Tom Curran, mm-hmm. who, of course, is a broadcaster who deals with the Patriots. And initially, Tom didn't think he was going to have any problem at all. But I said, okay, it's 3 hours. I'm going to come with you for the first night, or at least the first couple of nights. And I remember he was there for maybe an hour, and all of a sudden he said he was going to do a break. And I said to him, you're breaking kind of early. And he said, I told him everything I know. So I think what he was experiencing is the mm-hmm. same thing, where you have to sort of pull it back and realize that they're appreciating each and every moment along the way.
Absolutely. And there's a great anecdote about teaching that it's not just lecturing about facts and figures, it's really telling a story too. And public relations really is about storytelling. So oftentimes when I'm putting together my lecture notes, yes, there's a lot of facts and there's a lot of figures and there's a lot of theories that go on with it. But because I've been doing this for 25, 30 years, I have a lot of great stories, both from my earlier years all the way up to oftentimes my present clients. In a sense, sometimes the class is a sounding board for a strategy that I'm thinking about implementing, and if the target demographic for that client happens to be the same as the class, why not ask and get everything from the horse's mouth?
So you're utilizing all of it. I know that one of the events I remember that you and I always enjoyed with Dr. Silvestri, we would say happy birthday, Vito 90, was when Ed Bernays, the mm-hmm. father of public relations, used to come and mm-hmm. teach at Emerson. Do you remember some of those episodes with Dr. Bernays? I do.
It was almost like a movie star coming in, because here you had a master communicator coming to the campus, spending the evening, and really coming for the students. He had a good relationship with Dr. Vito and you, and I'm sure it was a great favor. But at the same time, you could really tell that when he showed up on campus and the students were there and he was interacting with them, that he was drawing just as much enjoyment and power, or energy, not power, out of them as the students were drawing out of him.
Now, Kevin, I remember when you first came, I remember you and your mother, Norma, came through 21 Commonwealth because you were considering coming to Emerson. Did you come as a comm studies major initially, or were you in another department?
I started out as a mass communication TV major, and that was essentially because I came from a technical high school, and I was told that I stood a better chance of getting admitted into Emerson if I depended upon my technical background. I actually have a certificate in computer science and electronic studies, which means historically I was always the kid in the family that would repair everybody's toaster ovens and VCRs. So I did one semester as a TV, mass comm TV major. I switched my major, well first I switched my advisor to Walt Littlefield.
Yes.
Because I intended on coming into comm studies. I spoke with Walt for about 30 minutes. I understood why everybody called him Uncle Walt.
Yes.
And
Incredible
essentially,
mentor.
Exactly. And essentially, I never looked back. I came into comm studies and loved it. As a matter of fact, when I came to Emerson College, I loved it. I knew within the first 2 to 3 weeks of studying here that I had found my tribe.
Now, what do you think it is about Emerson? Because you have been a very good colleague, a very dear friend over these years. We'll be moving on to the next chapter. But what is it about Emerson that you saw then, as we used to traverse down Commonwealth Avenue, talk to John Zachris, head over to Division 16 with Dr. Ratson and Ellen Gale and Sean Donnelly? What was that like, and what is it like today?
Well, I can't really talk about what it's like today because I'm only a few weeks into the new semester, having been the prodigal son coming back to Boston. But I know back then, Emerson students and Emerson itself always seemed to be a little bit different than the mainstream. People here, in one sense, you could say it was an art-oriented business school, or in another, you could say a business-oriented art school, depending on what classes you took and who your mentors were. But regardless, there was always something some intangible that you just can't put your finger on, but you just know that, yes, I could go to a large university. I could be one of 300 students in a class, or I can come to Emerson and really be one of 15 or 20 students in a class, have a real relationship with my professors. And that means more than just going to class, but also after class activities. Walt Littlefield at the end of the semester would say, "I'm going to the corner bar if anybody wants to join me for a drink," and half the class would come. It's something that it's an intangible that made me come back, made me stay, and like I said, made me come back to Boston again.
Well, I think, of course, we would walk over from 21 Commonwealth. You, of course, go by the very famous wall, which to me has always been kind of a stoop. Pass by Cheers, and of course, Walt liked the Sevens on Charles Street, which is still here. I know that Walt is not with us anymore, but I think his spirit lives on. We have a room for him. I know he would have been very happy last night with Michigan State beating Indiana. He would have said, "Love those Spartans." Kevin, you also switched to Polycom.
Mm-hmm.
You were a Polycom major. You got your master's. You also worked in the office. You kind of controlled. People said to me, "Gee, I remember Kevin Mercuri. In order to get through to you, you had to get through to him." What was it like being sort of the gatekeeper?
Well, that was a great experience because it was really 3 jobs in one. It was your graduate assistant, which meant that I had to get as much sleep as possible and eat well because I needed a good amount of energy. I was also teaching at the time, and I was a graduate student. So I had three classes, 3 jobs at once. The reality was, when you're that age and have that level of enthusiasm and energy, I look back and it was really easy. I would go to bed at 1 in the morning and wake up in time for a 9 a.m. class. Sometimes I had to teach that 9 a.m. class even. And it all really just worked out. It was a great experience. And I didn't have a lot of personal time otherwise, but then Emerson was my personal time. We had so many other, everything from an impromptu tag football game on Commonwealth Ave Mall to Division 16, or just going out somewhere or getting on an airplane for a trip somewhere and learning something new in another city or another country. It was all encompassing, and it was great.
Yeah, I remember, of course, you mentioned that our football field was basically the entryway, or the area between the 2 streets and over on Commonwealth. And Ella McDonough, who used to play with the rest of the guys, used to not really agree with touch football. I remember she would knock Ratson out into the street half the time. 21 Commonwealth, we had barbecues out in front. Right behind you, I can see Bill Hurwitz and others.
Yes.
Can you talk about what it was like in terms of the community at 21 Commonwealth?
Well, it was actually we were a smaller group compared to, I think, other schools within the college, and we actually did have a certain esprit de corps at that point among the grad students. The college itself had their own graduate level parties and events, but Comm Studies also had their own smaller events. And like I said, there was a great esprit de corps there. We actually liked spending time with each other. We compared notes on classes and compared notes on professors and planned out what other classes we were going to take before we graduated based on feedback from other students. The level of communication there was very high. The quality was good. And back then, the opportunity to go outside and have a burger or a hot dog and a beer with your professor and really not just talk about class was invaluable. You get to see your professors as real people and not just automatons who stand before the class and teach.
Of course, I think I remember, as you do, one of the smartest people I ever met, Dr. John Marlier, who tragically died of AIDS. He was a hemophiliac and contracted that through transfusions. Paul Erickson, who was a speechwriter for Al Gore. You also had various other people coming. You and I would go to the college club, which was across the street. I remember once, though, I came into it and I said, we've got a great opportunity. The Soviet Union has just fallen. And through some State Department work as well as through some other activities, I'm going to be going to Russia. And Kevin, I think you should go too. And I remember you went back to Avon. What was the family reaction immediately when you said I'm going to Russia?
They were tentative at best. They were definitely tentative at best.
I remember hearing your mother and father on the phone asking me, what?
Exactly. Well, it was the Berlin Wall had fallen, and the Soviet Union had also started to had fallen to the point at which you, and by extension me, were invited to act as United Nations affiliated election observers for what was the first truly democratic election in Russia. There was an earlier election that really wasn't. It was democratic in name only, but this one was truly democratic, and it was history being made. You could not pass up that opportunity.
I remember you and I went. We met, of course, the two ladies who did the first political commercial. Now, I remember we both sort of thought it was interesting because they looked at an election and they had all the people running, and it was like a gambling casino. You just pull the slot, and whoever you came up with, they said, "Who knows? We're going to possibly win." That was a Moscow that was really going through transition.
Absolutely.
Had very few things on shelves. I mean, what's your takeaway? I remember we went to McDonald's when it was looked upon as a grand opening.
And it was the nicest McDonald's I've ever been to in my life.
Yes.
It was also the best tasting McDonald's I've ever had. Probably one of the last McDonald's I actually ever have had. Capitalism had really started taking hold. In most cases, it was people selling their wares as a means of getting out of poverty, state-mandated poverty for that matter. So it was very exciting to see people buying and selling. I was told to bring items to barter, so you don't have to keep. I also had to bring hard currency, which was American dollars, and I drove the people at the bank crazy because the dollars had to be uncirculated. They didn't want crumpled dollars because Russians were afraid that crumpled dollars were counterfeit, so everything had to be crisp. But like I said, it was an amazing time in terms of people realizing not just capitalism, but also like the women we had met, amazing communicators, even if, to an extent Marshall McLuhan got turned on its ear by Russian media. The idea that there was a possibility that there was something better. Liberalism actually could be attained. The fact that capitalism is a means of self-determination. Like I said, it was very exciting. it wasn't all wine and roses over there. We saw some pretty sad things as well, but for the most part, it was an amazing experience.
Yes. In addition to that, of course, many other types of trips that you went on, etc. If you were looking back at the time at Emerson, was there something that stuck out besides Russia and some of those other trips that we went on?
Oh goodness, I would say the trip to Kent State for the Kent State retrospective was very moving and very educational, in that you look at the 4 students who were killed by the National Guard that day and realize, I mean, you can realize it on your own without getting on a plane to Ohio, but regardless, realize the fact that these students could have been you. One of the students actually was not partaking in the protest, was walking to class, and was shot by a stray bullet. So that stands out very much so as another experience.
Well, we're teaching the Kent State Jackson State course again, and we're going to have another retrospective in April, which we hope your PR class, maybe your PR class can be involved in helping to promote that.
Great.
And Mary Vecchio and John Philo, of course, the picture here, they will be here talking about what it was like at that time. It's interesting, though, that that's still a searing memory for you to go back to Kent.
Absolutely. I think, in light of recent events, too, with Black Lives Matter, the idea of the concept of a government that still can be violent to its people, it's a common thread throughout history, at least history of the United States.
Now, Kevin, what's interesting in this, I think your pathway shows that you can start out in one direction. I think of David Kaluzdian, who was political comm and now is president of Sherrill Merrill, an investment relations firm. You went down to D.C. and you went that routine for a while. Can you tell us your trip down to D.C., what you were doing there, and then how you ended up in New York, head of Profeta as its CEO?
Well, again, it goes back to the beauty of Emerson College. Communication studies brought recent graduates who had moved to Washington, D.C. up, and also brought us down to Washington, D.C. so we could speak with them and see how we could live and get an idea of how our jobs and our careers could change if we moved down there. And I really got the bug when I was down there, talking with John DiMattacchio, Sean Littlefield, various others, and really came to a realization that that's where I wanted to be for my next career move. I mean, all things being equal, I still look at my life today as, if you work hard and keep your options open, opportunities will avail themselves, and you can change your path at any time. Even to this day, I'm still looking for something new to do. Not that I don't love public relations, but if I've got another 10 to 12 years of work, I'm still going to want to keep those options open. But I went down to Washington, D.C., and admittedly, there's 2 types of people down in Washington, D.C. One is the lifer. They go down there and it's ingrained in their DNA. They're going to stay forever. They're going to end up either, unless they go home and run for Congress and then come back, or they're going to stay and become a legislative director or a chief of staff or an executive director of an NGO. And then there's the mercenaries like me, and that's really how I saw Washington, D.C. I thought to myself, about 5 years, this will hyper-accelerate my resume. I am doing things in Washington, D.C. that no one back home in the political world would ever let me do because I'm too junior. But the dirty little secret of Washington is a lot of the national government is run by 20 and 30-somethings. Those great speeches that are given, and not so great speeches that are given on the House or Senate floor, they're written by a 27-year-old. Legislation too, for that matter, is written by a very bright 30-year-old. So I really got some amazing experience, and a lot of times I would come back and I would speak with David Kaluzdian or Jeremy Milner or other people that I graduated with, and they were a little incredulous that I had so much responsibility and experience. But it goes back to my point that the country is run by kids to a large extent. So after about 5 years, I wanted out of Dodge. There's an old saying that in Washington, D.C., if you want a real friend, you should get a dog. And that was more or less the case. I remember you switched jobs, and oftentimes you switched friends. Friends really weren't your friends. You were just useful to them because of who you worked with or where you worked. So I really wanted to be, the next place I wanted to be was New York City, so I put myself out there and got recruited to a subsidiary of Edelman Communications. At the time, my last job in Washington, D.C. was working as a communications and lobbying director for an NGO that dealt with, it was an umbrella organization for technology interest. We represented everything from Bell Atlantic and AOL to Microsoft and Chase Bank, because we were also doing a lot of electronic banking for them. So I was very much entrenched in technology at that point. So I was recruited to run a .com team for Edelman Communications in New York City. And that was a great job until it wasn't, because that was around the time that the .com bubble burst. So I came on board, I did my best, clients started leaving because the bubble had burst, and then my last project was to downsize my team, and I would be the last to go. So then, again, working in Washington, I was used to being laid off. It happens. The executive director leaves and somebody cleans house, or the candidate doesn't get voted into office. So I just kept getting new jobs in New York and working my way up to the point at which I was at a mid-sized public relations agency. They didn't have a technology division to speak of, so they brought me on board to build and run one. And I did that for 5 years. During that time, the company made the Inc. 500 twice, which is no small feat, especially for a PR agency. And then that was my last job working for somebody else. During that time, I learned all that I could. I challenged myself as much as possible, and then I tried to take the summer of 2008 off, and actually a tweet came in. Somebody reached out to me via Twitter and said, and this was in June, and said that I'd like for you to launch my startup. How soon can you get to work? So that's how Profeta was born. I had already signed the incorporation papers, but I hadn't funded the company yet. But I just had to hustle and get to work.
Right. So that has been very good. I know you've been very helpful with internships. We've come down with various alums. Mm-hmm. We brought the Blanquerna School over, which is very, very good. I think what you mentioned earlier about how DC was such an important part for you to sort of make connections. One thing we're attempting to do with the establishment of a center in DC, with Spencer and Emerson Polling being a part of it, is to move away from the DC program, which of course is housing a lot of other colleges, but to come up with a DC program just like we have ELA. Mm-hmm. So I think when we do that, of course, it will be very helpful to have you as an advisor, etc. So Kevin, as we move to this last chapter, I know that you've relocated. You still have your place in New York, but mm-hmm. you bought a new condo, and you spend a lot of time with your father and, of course, your lovely wife, Sue. So where are you, and how close are you to Emerson now in terms of where you live?
It's funny. I'm right off of Route 3, the last exit before the Bourne Bridge.
Okay.
My wife said she wanted either a golf course view or a water view, and we managed to pull off both where we live.
Well, then you had to have a happy wife.
Exactly. Happy wife, happy life. So, the beauty is, first of all, I don't really mind the drive. Second of all, without traffic, from my garage to the Emerson campus without traffic is around 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. So it's a great time. I just listen to National Public Radio, or I take calls, and before I know it, I'm here.
Well, we are very fortunate to have you here. I know that you're teaching at the graduate level, and you're also teaching, of course, team teaching with the Patriots broadcaster for the sports PR.
Bob Sochi, yes.
And how is that? Bob is very excited to work with you. How do you like working with Bob?
Bob is great. In many ways, we came to this on equal footing because it had been a while since I had taught at the college level, and I believe him as well. So we both really just sat down via Zoom calls and really mapped out the class from scratch, and it was really exciting to collaborate with somebody and not and bring his side of his experience into the class as well. Because really, he's the sports journalist. I'm the sports PR person. So these students are getting the best of both worlds, and I'm really excited for him and for them. I mean,
Well, I think one of the reasons why we feel that we have grown something like 70% since 2014 is because we do combine the best in theory, but then make sure we plug into people like you and Bob as well as others.
Oh,
And
yes.
part of that Emerson Mafia.
we had Ken Swope come in. He's a very respected political consultant. The classes always loved him. There was another gentleman. He was a Republican consultant here in Boston. I can't think of his name. Jack.
Oh, I think I know who you mean. Yes.
Yeah, and I feel bad I can't think of his name because
Yes.
he had an uphill battle with students who mostly leaned left, but he had amazing stories, and he really, if you listen to him, you got the other. If you were left leaning, you got the other side of the story.
Is it Jack Wall?
Yes.
Yeah, Jack Wall.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think what that epitomized, which is what we're trying to bring back, is the ability to listen to both sides of an argument and to appreciate both sides and to get away from such a derisive climate, which we tried to inaugurate down at the global summit at the Watergate. And I know you just met Kat Grasso. Now, Kat Grasso is someone who's teaching a class for us. She worked for Rudy Giuliani. She's worked for Chris Christie. And what we try to do in the department is to give you various perspectives, and through critical and deliberative thinking, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
So, Kevin, what I would say to you is, if with the good old days, I would say let's leave 21 Commonwealth and go to Division 16. But we're down by the Commons, so we'll have to probably either after class sometime, you can go to your old haunt, and we could go to Vitas and Ritas, which you've been to, or we can take the upper class approach and go to Yvonne's. All right? All right.
All sounds good.
So with that in mind, welcome back.
Thank you.
And as we talked about in the 90s, a decade of distinction, I think we're seeing the same thing as we begin this new decade with Jay Bernhardt. Welcome back, Kevin.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Pain on Politics with another exciting, immersive member of the Mafia, Kevin Mercuri.